If all you had were a few coins in your pocket, would anyone be willing to pour you a cup of coffee and change your life forever? Tuesday afternoon passed quietly at Hazel and Hearth Cafe, tucked in the corner of Market View Street, where time seemed to move a little slower amid the soft clinking of spoons against cups and the warm, rich scent of roasted coffee beans hanging in the air. Lena Murray had worked there for over 6 years, not because the pay was enough to live on, but because this place once gave her a sense of safety, a familiar little corner in a city that moved faster by the day. She remembered that Mr. Kenneth always ordered a half-sweet latte, that Mrs. Doyle always asked for an extra packet of brown sugar, and she remembered the silent nods from regulars. No words needed, yet perfectly understood. But life outside the cafe was anything but peaceful. Her mother had just been diagnosed with stage 3 cancer, and their health insurance was almost useless. Her younger brother was trying to apply to college, but even the application fee was a hurdle. Lena scraped together every penny from extra shifts, yet it never seemed to be enough. Still, each morning, she tied her hair back, put on her apron, and whispered the same familiar phrase to herself: kindness costs nothing. That afternoon, the bell over the door gave a soft ring. A man walked in. He looked to be in his 50s, wearing a worn-out sweater with frayed sleeves, scuffed shoes, and walked slowly, as if afraid to disturb the air. Lena stepped to the counter, coffee pot in hand. "Would you like a cup of coffee, sir?" she asked gently, her eyes free of judgment. The man nodded, then hesitated and reached for his wallet. Only a few loose coins fell out, the clinking sound of metal loud enough to echo across the cafe. From the manager's station, Ronald Avery watched with narrowed eyes. He didn't raise his voice, but it carried enough to be heard. No money, no coffee. Simple as that. Lena froze for a moment. She looked at the coins in the man's hand, then into his eyes, not begging, just quietly resilient. She poured the coffee, a full cup, set it down softly on the counter, and leaned in. "This one's on me." The man paused, lips tightening as if holding back an emotion long buried. "Thank you," he whispered, and Lena only nodded. But that single nod was enough to make Ronald slam his clipboard down on the counter, storm over, his voice sharp like a blade. "Do you think this is your cafe? Who gave you permission to do that? You're fired." No one spoke. The kitchen crew peeked out. Customers froze mid-sip. Lena simply untied her apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the counter. Before stepping out through the wooden door she had walked through for 6 years, she turned, eyes locked on Ronald. "I just hope that one day you understand kindness is worth more than a handful of coins." Outside, the wind whipped at her thin coat as Lena walked away. No tears, no breakdown, just an aching emptiness inside. She didn't know where she was going or what she would do next. But one thing she knew: she had no regrets. What she didn't know was that the man sipping that cup of coffee, the one she had treated like a real human being, was the very person who would change her life and the entire cafe system he had quietly observed for years. From that moment on, Hazel and Hearth would never be the same cafe again. That night, in a penthouse aglow with soft amber light overlooking Viridian Avenue, Jasper Kane stood silently by the window. The cup of coffee in his hand had gone cold, but inside him, something was burning. He couldn't shake the image of Lena's face, calm, resolute, unwavering as she placed a cup of coffee before a worn-out man. She didn't know who he was, and she didn't need to. To Lena, kindness required no credentials. And that, more than anything, left Jasper feeling both redeemed and ashamed. He was the founding CEO of Legacy Bean Group, a coffee chain spanning over 70 cities nationwide. But today, he had to disguise himself as a homeless man just to see what no internal report would ever show. A week earlier, he'd received an anonymous letter, machine-typed, flawless in grammar, detailing acts of employee intimidation, tip skimming, and forced overtime at the Hazel and Hearth branch. Jasper didn't believe it at first, but something urged him to return to where it all began, where he had once been a dishwasher, pulling all-nighters to perfect a latte recipe that would one day become the brand's signature. He had posed as a tired drifter wearing a frayed wool sweater his mother had knit when he was 20. He walked into the cafe expecting nothing, certainly not warmth. But Lena stopped him in his tracks. Not just for her kindness, but for the look in her eyes, the gaze of someone who still believed in goodness, even while she was breaking inside. In stark contrast, Ronald, the branch manager, once labeled consistent and efficient in his reports, acted like a petty tyrant. Jasper remembered every word, every sideways glance from Ronald, and he knew then what he'd just witnessed wasn't an isolated event. It was a symptom of something far deeper. Jasper sat at his desk and opened his laptop. He called Alyssa, his most trusted executive assistant. "I need the complete personnel file from the Hazel and Hearth branch. That includes internal reports, anonymous feedback, and the work schedule of someone named Lena Murray." His voice wasn't rushed, but it was unmistakably firm. Alyssa hesitated, then quietly asked, "Is something wrong, sir?" Jasper answered simply, "I just saw our brand's core values crushed in a cup of coffee, and an employee destroyed for daring to be kind." He paused, staring at his reflection in the glass. "I want a meter, no cameras, no press, just one person speaking to another." And then he wondered, was this a one-time failure, or just the tip of a system rotting from within? A company founded on the mission of serving from the heart, now firing someone for offering a gesture of compassion. He knew he had to act not just to save Lena, but to reclaim what he once believed in. That night, Jasper didn't sleep. He read every line of past reports, sifted through payroll records and employee reviews. Then he froze an anonymous complaint sent 4 months ago. It was from Lena. She had already spoken up once, and had been buried. Now he understood Lena's act of kindness wasn't impulsive. It was the second time she chose to stand on the side of what's right, and he would not let her pay the price again. Tomorrow everything would begin to change. Every word, every face in that cafe would never be the same. The next morning, just as the clock struck 8, the glass door of Hazel and Hearth slowly swung open. A man walked in wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit, a dark silk tie, and polished leather shoes that tapped softly against the wooden floor. The light from outside glinted off a small pin on the left lapel of his jacket, the gold-plated emblem of the Legacy Bean Group. No one in the cafe recognized him at first, except for Ronald Avery, who was standing at the counter checking online orders. One glance, and Ronald froze. His breath caught in his throat. His lips parted as if to speak, but his voice was already dry. That man, Jasper Kane, was not hurried, not loud. He walked past each table like he was strolling through memories, observing every faded wall corner, every chair still bearing the old scratches from the days when he used to bus tables here. Every step was a silent message: I have returned, not to watch, but to reclaim what has been lost. The staff said nothing. The junior barista, still shaken from yesterday's scolding, looked up at Jasper as if witnessing something beyond comprehension. One of the cooks whispered, "It's him that's really him." Ronald forced himself to approach, clipboard in hand, awkwardly offering a smile. "Good morning. Can I help you with anything, sir?" Jasper didn't answer right away. He let the question linger in the air like a rope suspending Ronald's pride. Then, in a calm and steady voice, he replied, "I believe it's the other way around. You're the one who needs to explain." Ronald's gaze wavered. "You're from headquarters?" he stammered. Jasper tilted his head slightly, offering a faint smile. "That's one way to put it." Then he walked up to the counter, gently touching the dark wood surface he had once installed with his own hands. "I'm Jasper Kane, founder and CEO of the company you currently stand upon." The room fell silent. Ronald broke into a sweat. "If I'd known you were coming, I'd have prepared better. There may have been a misunderstanding yesterday." Jasper cut him off with a look cold as steel. "I'm not here to be welcomed. I'm here to see how people are treated when no one's watching." He turned back, voice low but sharp. "I watched Lena get fired for pouring a cup of coffee in front of customers in broad daylight because you couldn't tolerate a simple act of kindness." Ronald tried to defend himself. "She gave away product without permission. That causes financial loss." Jasper met his eyes. "She gave away compassion. You gave away fear." At that moment, the staff began to inch closer. One sighed, another nodded silently. Jasper continued, never raising his voice but commanding every breath in the room. This wasn't the first time. 4 months ago, an anonymous report was sent to our office detailed with supporting evidence. It described tip skimming, forced shift cuts, and discriminatory scheduling. I found out who wrote that letter. He paused. It was Lena. And then you fired her not because of a cup of coffee, but because she had the courage to tell the truth. Ronald was speechless. His face turned pale. Jasper pulled a file from his jacket pocket. This contains everything: payroll logs, employee interviews, customer feedback. And I have one thing to say to you, Ronald Avery. As of this moment, you are dismissed. The cafe fell into stunned silence. Some mouths hung open. One person gently clapped. Jasper slowly made his way toward the door, then turned one last time. You thought you could hide because no one was looking. But the most dangerous thing about abusing power isn't the punishment. It's believing you'll never be seen. And then he walked out, leaving behind a cafe shedding its fear one layer at a time. But what awaited ahead was not collapse, it was a beginning. Because Lena still didn't know that the door to her life was about to open in a way no one could have imagined. That evening, in the small third-floor apartment tucked behind an old motel parking lot, Lena sat alone at the kitchen table, a cup of tea long gone cold under the dim yellow light of a faded ceiling bulb. Spread across the table were her mother's hospital bills, each sheet of paper like a fresh cut tearing through her thoughts. She hadn't told her mother she'd been fired. Her mother still believed Lena was working late shifts at the cafe, still believed everything would be fine as long as my girl stays strong. But Lena knew this time, strength wouldn't be enough. Her life was teetering on the edge, unemployed, no savings, no way out. All she had left was her pride, and one haunting question lingering in her mind. Is it really worth it to be a good person? Just then there was a knock at the door. Soft, steady, 3 taps in rhythm, as if someone were deliberately careful not to shatter the quiet. Lena stood up, heart pounding. No one usually knocked at her door this late, except maybe a utility collector or sometimes bad news. She opened the door and froze. Standing before her was the man she had served that coffee to, not in the frayed sweater or with the weary eyes, but now upright, dignified in a sleek suit, face clear and calm, and a voice deeper and warmer than anything she'd heard all day. "Good evening, Miss Murray," he said gently, as if afraid to startle her. "I'm Jasper Kane, CEO of Legacy Bean Group." Lena stood speechless, her hand still on the doorknob. "I don't understand," she whispered. Jasper nodded. "I'm the man you served coffee to, and the one you were fired for helping." The air seemed to hold still for a moment. Lena didn't know how to react, invite him in, shut the door, or simply believe this was really happening. In the end, she stepped aside. Jasper entered quietly, scanning the modest apartment where every corner told a story of sacrifice. On the table were cancer medications, college brochures, and a faded photo of 3 people: her mother, her younger brother, and Lena, captured in a moment of peace. Jasper sat down and placed 2 envelopes in front of her. "This," he said, "is an official job offer from our company, not to return as a barista, but to become regional culture and training supervisor overseeing 3 locations, including the one where you used to work." Lena opened her mouth to protest, but he gently raised a hand. "You don't have to answer now, but I know one thing for sure: you don't just know how to make coffee. You know how to preserve human dignity in every action." She opened the envelope. Inside was the offer letter, a salary far beyond her imagination, comprehensive insurance. But what made her hands tremble was the second envelope. "Your mother's treatment expenses will cover all of it," Jasper said, his voice softening. "No strings attached, simply because you gave when no one asked you to." Lena covered her mouth. Tears streamed down, not because of the offer, but because, for the first time in a long while, she felt seen. Jasper added, "And I hear your brother is waiting on a scholarship? We'll cover his first year of tuition as well. Under your name." The room was still. Lena cried not loudly, just quiet tears that ran down her face like a release from all the endurance she had carried alone. As Jasper stood to leave, he looked back at her for a long moment. "Thank you for the coffee. But more than that, thank you for not choosing silence." And when the door closed gently behind him, Lena remained at the table, still holding the offer letter, her eyes gazing out the misted window. She knew her life had just turned a page. Not because of luck, but because of one small act, a cup of coffee, and the courage to show kindness when no one else dared. 2 days later, at exactly 8 a.m., the glass door of Hazel and Hearth opened once more. But this time it wasn't the CEO who stepped in. It was Lena, wearing her old denim jacket, the familiar canvas bag still slung over one shoulder, and an expression that made the entire room pause in an oddly hushed moment. No one spoke at first, perhaps because everyone had heard something, through whispers, through urgent meetings, but no one quite believed the girl who had been fired 3 days ago, the one who had stood tall and said, "I hope one day you understand kindness is worth more than a few bucks," would return, and not to ask for her job back. The first to speak was Miguel, the soft-spoken head chef who had been with the cafe since day one. He stepped out from the kitchen, wiped his hands on his apron, looked at Lena for a long moment and nodded. "It's about time." Just a simple sentence, but it felt like the whole cafe took a breath. The junior barista, the boy once scolded by Ronald for wiping tables too slowly, stepped away from the espresso machine, his eyes following Lena like he was witnessing something beyond what he ever thought a leader could be. Lena didn't walk in like an honored guest. She moved toward the counter, took off her bag, hung it on the hook like always, and quietly placed 2 folders on the manager's desk. "I'm not here to take over the cafe," she said clearly. "I'm here to restore what should have never been lost kindness." In the back room, an old sign still hung on the wall. "No excuses, no exceptions." Lena took it down without hesitation. The brittle paper cracked under her fingers as she fed it into the shredder. She had no reason to hold on to anything born from an era ruled by fear. Then she pulled out a new plaque, lightly embossed, a soft cream background with slanted gray lettering that read, "Lead with respect, serve with heart." Jasper had given her that plaque the night she signed her contract, along with one simple instruction: "If you believe in this, hang it where everyone can see." Lena did just that. She pinned it above the manager's desk, a place that once held only messy papers and deadline reminders. That afternoon, an elderly man walked in shy posture, silver hair thinning, eyes glimmering with hope. "If it's not too much, I'd just like a coffee, nothing else," he said softly. Lena smiled, poured the coffee, added a bit of milk just the way she used to, and placed it gently in front of him. "We always have time for something warm." The man looked at her, eyes misty. "This place, it feels different now." Lena nodded gently. "Because now it's been rebuilt on trust." In the kitchen, Miguel leaned toward the new dishwasher and whispered, "I told you she'd come back. But she's not just back, she's going to change everything." And truly what Lena brought wasn't just a new title. It was a spirit, not loud, not slogan-filled, but the return of something gentle and right, arriving exactly when and where it was most needed. And Hazel and Hearth, for the first time in many months, began to smile again. Just 3 days after Lena returned to Hazel and Hearth, the changes began to take shape not through bold announcements or pressure-filled meetings, but through a quiet yet steady atmosphere that spread from the barista counter and the cashier's station all the way to the back kitchen. Staff no longer whispered when a manager passed by, no longer averted their eyes when a customer complained. They held their heads up, they checked in on one another. They poured coffee not just with their hands, but with the presence of someone who genuinely wanted to listen. And at the heart of that transformation was Lena, no slogans, no speeches, just doing exactly what kindness had once taught her to do: to be present, to listen, and to lead. The sign that read, "Lead with respect, serve with heart," began drawing attention. A middle-aged woman snapped a photo and posted it online with the caption, "This is why I came back to this cafe." Within 24 hours, the post had been shared tens of thousands of times. Countless comments poured in, asking for the cafe's address, asking about the barista who was fired for offering a free cup of coffee. But when the media started calling, Lena declined every request. "I didn't do anything special," she said in a brief phone interview. "This story shouldn't be about me, it should be about how we choose to treat one another." Still, social media doesn't easily forget. Lena's story, simple but deeply genuine, moved people. Not because she was a hero, but because she was an ordinary person who dared to do the right thing at the hardest moment. Photos of the sign, of the quiet corner where she had once been fired, of the plain coffee cup set on a napkin spread across states. And then something unexpected happened. Other Hazel and Hearth branches began calling headquarters asking to display the same sign. Managers proposed internal kindness initiatives. A few locations even hosted small gatherings where employees retold Lena's story not as a symbol, but as a reminder that every major change begins with something small. From his executive office in Chicago, Jasper Kane observed everything in thoughtful silence. He didn't speak to the press, didn't release a statement, but on a quiet Monday morning, he signed an internal memo titled simply, "Kindness Initiative. We begin again from within." In that document, Lena Callahan, her new name on her business card, was acknowledged as the first person to lead the way. Jasper didn't hand out an award. Instead, he sent her a short text message. "You just did something it took me 20 years to learn, making kindness contagious." That day, when a new employee asked Lena why she had turned down a television interview, she simply shrugged and softly said, "Because this is where I'm needed." She spoke those words while showing the new hire how to tell a double espresso from a single latte, not through theory, but by observing the customer's reaction, by sensing the aroma of the coffee rising, by catching that first look of someone being truly served. Then she went back to work as if she had never left, but now carrying a new responsibility, to rebuild the soul of the cafe, starting with the things no one notices. Hazel and Hearth was no longer a place people visited out of routine. Now they came for the feeling, the sense that they were entering a space where kindness was seen, acknowledged, and shared. And Lena, though she had never asked for it, had become the quiet heart of a growing movement where every act of kindness carried weight, and every cup of coffee could be the beginning of something better. One cold October morning, as Lena wiped down the counter, a young man walked in. He wore a gray hoodie, his hair was messy, and a thin, worn backpack hung over one shoulder. His sneakers were almost without soles. He approached the counter with a distant but polite gaze, as if already prepared to be turned away. Lena looked up and offered a gentle smile. "Good morning. How can I help you?" He hesitated, his voice hoarse and quiet. "I heard this place sometimes helps people. I can pay a little, but I really just need a hot cup of coffee." That sentence pulled Lena straight back to the moment a few weeks ago where it all began. She didn't ask how much money he had, didn't scan his eyes or request documents. She simply asked, "Do you like it black or with milk?" When he nodded, nearly in tears, she placed a steaming cup of coffee in front of him, along with a warm sandwich. "I didn't order this," he whispered, looking down at the plate. Lena smiled. "You don't have to order. Some things we receive simply because we need them." At a nearby table, an elderly couple quietly watched. They said nothing, exchanged a glance, then pulled out their wallet and discreetly paid for the young man's meal before leaving. No explanation, no fanfare, just kindness, the way it was always meant to be. No one recorded the moment. There was no hashtag, no spotlight. But for Lena, it was more precious than any time on camera. That afternoon, Jasper Kane came to Hazel and Hearth. No driver, no suit, just Jasper in an earth-toned shirt and gray jeans. He sat at his usual spot, where sunlight streamed through the window, casting a warm glow across the table. Lena brought over his coffee. "Do I get charged this time?" Jasper asked, a playful glint in his eye. "No," Lena replied. "But if you tell a good story, I'll throw in a cookie." They both laughed a light, unburdened laugh, free from titles or past weights. They didn't talk much, just sat quietly, occasionally watching the people pass by. But before he stood up to leave, Jasper turned to her. I saw the sign in the office. Lena asked, "Did you like it?" Jasper nodded. "Very much. But I brought something else I'd like to hang beside it." He handed her a small wooden plaque, framed in elegant brass with gold-etched letters that read, "In honor of Lena Murray, for reminding us that true service begins with the heart." Lena was stunned, her eyes welling. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. "No one becomes a symbol just for pouring a cup of coffee." Jasper looked at her for a long moment before replying, "It's because you never tried to become anything that you are the most deserving." He left the way he came, quietly, without ceremony. Lena stood there for a long while, holding the plaque not as a prize, but as a flame. Because from that day forward, people didn't come to the cafe asking, "Is she the one?" but saying, "I brought this story back to my workplace." A server in Dallas shared that they gave free coffee to a homeless man that morning, just thinking of Lena. A branch manager in Colorado started hanging signs that read, "Kindness served here," each one personally printed. And new trainees in the internal program now begin their sessions with a video not about technical skills, but about Lena and the cup of coffee. The story no longer belongs to Lena alone. It belongs to anyone who ever doubted the power of a small gesture, and now understands that sometimes all it takes is a cup of coffee, given at the right moment, in the right way, from the right heart, to change everything. 3 months had passed since the day Lena was fired, only to return with a role that meant more than any title, and Hazel and Hearth Cafe still looked the same. The white-painted brick walls still showed every flake of chipped paint. The espresso machine still hissed each morning like an old habit, and the crooked doorbell still chimed a note off every time someone entered. But something had changed forever. The atmosphere inside was no longer thick with caution, but held an invisible fragrance of reassurance, the kind of peace that comes from knowing you can be yourself, from knowing kindness is encouraged, not punished. The nameplate with Lana's name still hung beside the register, and beneath it was a small note she had written by hand. "No act of kindness is ever wasted." People took photos of it, shared it, and quietly began changing their own behavior, not out of obligation, but out of inspiration. The kind Lena never tried to create, but somehow carried with her each day like a beam of sunlight through the window that no one noticed until it disappeared. One morning, as Lena wiped down a table, a young man walked in. Thin, with hands in his pockets, he carried himself with the hesitation of someone expecting to be turned away. He approached the counter and cautiously asked, "Could I get a cup of coffee? I'll come back to pay, it's just really cold today." Lena didn't answer right away. She simply tilted her head, smiled gently, and poured a steaming cup, placing it in front of him with a small sandwich. "Here," she said, "we serve coffee, not judgment." And from a table across the room, a customer quietly added a few dollars to the tip jar before leaving. Kindness no longer needed to be a campaign. It happened at the coffee counter, in the kitchen, by the pastry case, quietly but consistently, like heat spreading through a ceramic mug. Lena no longer needed to be everywhere. She split her time across 3 branches, leading trainings not by standard manuals, but through observation. Who needed trust? Who needed gentle guidance? Who deserved a second chance? One day, she walked through the cafe with a newly transferred employee from another state, a young woman who barely spoke and often looked down. When they stopped in front of the wall of recognition, the girl paused. "That's you?" she asked. Lena nodded and shrugged. "I just poured a cup of coffee." The girl looked at the plaque for a long time, as if reading far more than the words written there. And in Jasper's eyes, watching from the corner of the room, that was what he had once dreamed of, a leader who didn't need to convince anyone, only to be present at the right moment. That evening, as Lena locked up after the night shift, she looked up at the newly designed sign hanging on the window, a sign she had suggested and that Jasper approved the week before. "Welcome, just coffee here, no judgment." The streetlight reflected softly on the glass. Inside, the cafe was dark, but the small plaque by the register still glowed gently from a maintenance light in the back. Lena stood still, hand on the lock, her eyes softening as if closing a journal. This place had once humiliated her, rejected her, made her feel invisible, and yet it was also the place that had given her back everything, recognized her, and allowed her to be seen as a person. Not because she did anything grand, but because she didn't walk away from someone at the right time, in the right way. Kindness, like a chemical reaction with no formula, only requires a soul clear and brave enough to begin. Hazel and Hearth Cafe had changed. And Lena Murray, once just a server with a faded apron, was now the soul keeper of an entire brand, not through authority, but through humanity. Because in the end, in a world where everyone rushes to outdo each other, one cup of coffee, if poured from the heart, can do what no leadership training ever could: make people believe in kindness all over again. In my role as a strategic advisor to many businesses, I have witnessed hundreds of policies being drafted, yet very few have the power to resonate like a simple act of kindness that needs no documentation. Lena didn't create change through authority, but through character. And sometimes, a free cup of coffee holds more value than $1 million campaign if it reignites something we're at risk of losing empathy. If you believe that kindness is still something that can be contagious in the midst of life's chaos, then please like this video and subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing more stories that speak to the human spirit. And don't forget to leave a comment with the words, "Choose kindness," because you might just be the spark for the next ripple of change.